In the last couple days since the untimely death of Charlie Kirk by an assassin's bullet, how many of you have seen on your social media feed something along the lines of, I don't normally post political stuff, but I've seen a lot of that on my feed. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that on yours. And the thought occurred to me with this whole thing going on that we're not at a point about talking politics when we're simply expressing condolences for a young man who expressed his political opinion in good faith and had debates with people using democratic process, which exists to prevent violence if you actually think about it. And, everybody wants to say, oh, well, I don't post political stuff. And yes, I know this is a farming channel. And if you bear with me for a second, I will elucidate where I'm going with this claim, because part of the reason we're at a point in our country where people are getting gunned down for simply expressing views that are unpopular with a certain part of the population is because people like us who have kind of normal values, and we can agree or disagree with all the nuances of Charlie Kirk's position. This isn't about Charlie Kirk and what his specific views were and the nuts and bolts of those arguments, but the general idea that people should be able to have a conversation about different things and disagree, have debates, and even people with really extreme and preposterous ideas, that it's better if they can be in the public square and have conversations where they can have their ideas challenged and taken apart, so that it kind of decompresses. It acts like a pressure valve for society, so we don't come to a point where people say, you know what, we can't resolve our disputes any other way, so screw democracy, let's start stacking bodies. And that's the whole point of having a First Amendment. But the fact that this type of ethos, this ideology, is something that people feel that it's necessary to preface a comment about this with, I don't normally post political stuff and I'm kind of tiptoeing around it and I'm going to apologize. That's the problem. We have been giving ground to people with extreme ideas who have no interest in civil discourse, no interest in sharing a society with people who see the world differently than them. And I have said this before, my parents' generation, the boomers, they kind of put their head down, did their thing. When they didn't like the way politics were getting, they moved out of town, they moved out of state, they moved to a different place, they started a different kind of life. These schools are getting a little bit crazy. You know what, I don't like some of where they're going with the social stuff. Oh, they don't allow prayer in schools. Let's just kind of move, and we kind of go and we push, 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 and we just keep backing up and giving ground. And the point of this is, I obviously didn't know Charlie Kirk. I did not share a lot of his views politically. I mean, a lot of them I did. I would say probably, maybe 60 to 70% I aligned with some of his views. But when I'm scrolling through my social media feed and I'm seeing former friends and family celebrating the death of a guy because he had different opinions than them, and not just like it was too bad he got sick and died, but like a brutal and traumatizing death in front of his wife and like 2-year-old kids. And I got little kids, so that kind of hit really close to home. It made me realize that that could just as easily have been me sharing a lot of those views and getting taken out for having those views. And these people, they would be celebrating my death just like they're celebrating his, because there's no middle ground. There's no continuum of, okay, well, we can agree to disagree, but we share a society because at least we have a few things in common, a few basic concepts that we all are, on the same page about. But there's no sharing a society with people like this. And so, you know, looking into my own life, what does this actually mean? Well, it means that we are being tested. And it's time for us, the normal people who don't talk about politics, it's time for those people, for you and me, to stop apologizing for the views and the opinions that we hold and to fucking stand up for something. Because the reality is, a lot of people like Charlie Kirk because he was a guy who stood for something. Agree or disagree with a lot of his opinions. And again, like specifically his views on Israel, I disagree with a lot of his views on Israel, at least what I heard over the years. And there's some other things I didn't necessarily see eye to eye with him, but the guy clearly stood for something. And what we're starting to realize is that instead of us standing for something ourselves, what we are starting to do is we invest our political beliefs, our moral codes, our ethics into figureheads who become representative of kind of, yeah, this is kind of where I'm at, and I'm going to make someone else an avatar for what I believe. And in the process, we as individuals lose a grasp. We lose that purpose. We lose that focus where we can say, this is what I will live and die for. This is what I believe. This is who I am. And I am going to stand for this in every asset, in every aspect, in every part of my life. I'm going to stand for this, rather than just saying, oh, well, Charlie Kirk goes out to college campuses and debates people. So, hey, good on you, Charlie. I'm going to keep my head down because I don't want to piss people off. Because maybe if I can just make people comfortable and accommodate them a little bit, maybe, we can still be friends. Maybe she'll still go out with me. Maybe she won't like rock the boat. Maybe I'll still get invited to Thanksgiving. Maybe we can still work together. Maybe we can still do business, right? That is clearly off the table. It's time for us as individuals to now start to really define who we believe. And I'm not saying this as a person who has everything figured out, who knows exactly who I am and what I believe, but I can tell you that I'm taking a much more serious look about the way that I stand for things. And instead of saying, oh no, this is dirty words, this is dirty topics, we can't talk about politics. And it's like saying that people should be able to disagree without getting shot for speaking to people. That's not politics. That's not something I'm going to apologize for, because at the end of the day, as a person, these are ethics and moral codes that we need to stop giving ground. We need to stop surrendering and being pushed around in public, and to stand up and say, this is the way that it is. This is the kind of society that we're going to live in. We don't have to all agree with each other. We can have differing views on differing topics, but at the end of the day, what we have been shown is that that sort of coexistence and mutual respect does not exist. And the time is now to take an example from a guy like Charlie Kirk, and there are others that are doing this, I think, but instead of lamenting the fact that we have lost an avatar who went out there and did it for us, we need to be pressing in and being more careful about who it is that we are and who we want to be and how we want to build a legacy and what we are standing up for. Because nobody else is going to do it for us. We can't outsource that. We can't, get somebody on Fiverr to go out there and stand up for the things that we believe in, and just drifting through life and saying, oh, you know what, I just believe in whatever I feel like, is not going to cut it anymore. We need to actually have this stuff well thought out. And that's part of the reason why people respected a guy like Charlie Kirk, is because he spent time refining his positions, refining his beliefs, so that when somebody said, oh, well, what do you think about abortion? He could sit there and give you a very cogent argument about exactly why he believed what he believed. And it's not all easy, and no, everybody is not going to agree, but we need to stop letting the field kind of push us around and dictate what we're going to say and who we're going to be. And so based on that, I'm starting to do a little bit more work looking at myself. And, this is a farm channel. I'm doing farming, but at the end of the day, a lot of the traditional family and faith-based beliefs that Charlie got shot for, frankly, are the things that drove me to farming. It's because I want to be responsible and I want to be in control of the food that I produce. I want to have independence and freedom. I want to be able to exercise my right to defend myself and protect myself and develop businesses and not have the government interfering on every level. And at the end of the day, we're not in a position where we can just kind of be quiet and go along to get along anymore, because the last guy, who was the one guy who said, you know what, let's just talk it out. Let's not get upset. Let's not raise our voices. Let's not come to blows. That guy just got shot in the neck for being civil and exercising the epitome of democracy, which is let's have a discussion, let's debate the things that we disagree with. That is democracy. And how many people do you hear saying, oh, we're a democracy, we need to be, they attacked our democracy. Whenever you hear anything about like January 6th, it's always like this evil, this buzzword that conjures up the most evil specter of vile humanity when they say, oh, they attacked our democracy. And the one guy on the right who was like the milquetoast, even for all of his beliefs, he would give good arguments, but Charlie Kirk was not an extremist. He was a milquetoast, like center of the road conservative. He had pretty basic conservative beliefs. He wasn't racially motivated. He wasn't, he wanted to get rid of illegals and people who came into the country illegally, but he wasn't saying, oh, we need to make, he was in no way like a white supremacist or some kind of, racially motivated guy. He was very milquetoast, to the criticism of a lot of people on the right who were like, come on, like, really, is that all you got? That's kind of weak. And I mean, in some ways, I felt that way about some of his views, but that was the guy who was trying to be very calm and very, not so fast, guys. And he got shot in the neck in front of his wife and kids for his efforts. And while I have a moment here, I just want to address the one thing that keeps coming up in a lot of the conversations on Facebook, where I see people making the argument that, he argued for people to be able to have guns. And he said that people who have guns, gun death and gun violence is going to be a sacrifice that we have to make in order for people to have the Second Amendment. And that was a sacrifice he was willing to make, in so many words, right? That's not verbatim, but that's a rough paraphrase of what he said. And the idea that somebody would acknowledge that a necessary implement for self-defense would be misused, that somehow justifies a person's life being taken through that means, is completely insane. That's like saying that because somebody advocates for everybody to be allowed to drive, that if they get hit by a drunk driver, even though they said, yeah, I know that there's going to be car accidents and there's going to be people who get behind the wheel drunk, does that mean that if you hold that opinion, you deserve to have your life taken from you by a hit and run or by a drunk driver? Like, absolutely not. And this mindset, this culture, is all being pushed, unfortunately, by people who don't know anything about the issues and haven't actually listened to Charlie Kirk. And again, I apologize for getting off into the weeds on this a little bit, because my point is not to assess Charlie's beliefs or his positions as much as it is to say that this is a crystallizing event where a lot of people are being forced to stop and say, now what? Now what is now? It's up to us to stop giving ground to people who are violent extremists and who are freaks. Like it or not, that's what a lot of the people who are against and violently opposed, these are people who don't want to share a society with you. And in a case like that, you have one of two options. Either you stop giving ground, because it's like when a cat and a mouse are playing together, the mouse doesn't have the option of just like, well, I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to hang out over here. Because guess what? The cat's going to come and the cat's going to smack him around until ultimately he's dead. That's the goal of what is being advocated here for in the people that are reacting gleefully. And ultimately, we have ourselves to blame for a lot of this, because we have stood down and kept our heads down so that we could keep jobs and relationships, and we have let people like Charlie Kirk, these figureheads in the media, take the heat for us. And occasionally we'll like their stuff and repost their stuff, but at the end of the day, we can't outsource that anymore. We have to say, this is who I am, this is what I believe, and if you don't know where you are and who you are and what you believe, it's time to start testing those beliefs so that you can have a more refined, a more robust presence wherever you go, so that you can say, you know what? No, here's what I actually think about this. No, I'm not just going to turn the other cheek. No, I'm not going to look away and just say, oh, okay, well, they're doing X, Y, and Z in my kid's school or in my workplace, and these are things that I don't agree with. These are things that I'm not okay with. No, I'm actually going to give a reasoned position, and I'm not going to just keep my head down anymore because nobody's coming to help you. Nobody's coming to save you. You have to be willing to stick your neck out and live for, and if necessary, be willing to die for the beliefs that you have, because otherwise, what is it? If you're not willing to die for what you believe, and yeah, that's a really high bar to put on something, to say, what are you willing to die for? If you haven't stopped to think about that, this is a time to start to think about that and say, what is worth dying for? Because everything else is just fluff. Everything else is not really that important. And if this is the first time in your life that it's occurred to you that, hey, I could die for some of the things that I believe or don't believe, now's the time to start putting that stuff together, because this is where we are. And we need to be solid as people and know who we are and know what we believe in, because at the end of the day, we're not going to change minds necessarily, and we have to be prepared for pushback from those who are in opposition to these views, or those who aren't willing to have a conversation. It's not even about specific views and like, oh, I believe this about abortion, or I believe this about gay marriage, and somebody believes something else, and now how are we going to handle this moving forward? No, like, I fully accept the fact that I live in a country where there's differing views and differing laws, and all of that stuff is fine. I don't expect everybody to share my belief, but I'm not going to be reticent about saying, hey, you know what? No, I don't agree with this. I don't believe this. And nowhere is that concept more important. And I know this is not like a dating channel by any stretch, but nowhere is that concept more important than in the world of dating for younger people. And if you're divorced and you're starting over and you're trying to think about, like, how do I start over and move forward? Nowhere is this concept more important than when you see people who are dating who say, you know what, I'm just going to kind of lay low because I like this person and I don't want to piss them off. I don't want to make a fight. We can just kind of be good enough and go along to get along. That is the exact opposite of what needs to happen, because what our country needs right now is we need faith and family and freedom, in that order, I would argue, because if you have faith, it's going to lead to family. And if you have families, freedom is going to be part of that. It goes in order if we do that. And I don't have everything figured out by any stretch, but those are the values that led me to want to farm and want to raise kids, and raise kids in an environment where I can do that, what I would consider to be a wholesome and right way. And that's the culminating point. Either we believe in those things and we're willing to fight and die for them. And I don't mean fight and die like going out and taking up arms. That's not what I'm talking about. And anybody who has an IQ anywhere above room temperature should understand that. I'm saying that ultimately I am not going to pretend to believe something that I don't and say things that I don't believe, because of the fact that there are violent people who may make attempts on my life or on my employment, or make life difficult for me because they want to be spiteful. Because you can't run, right? If you give ground and you say, oh, well, I'll just kind of keep my head down, they're just going to keep pushing you and pushing you and pushing you and pushing you. They're not going to leave you anywhere to run to. So it's time to take up that burden of refining and defining our positions and stand for something, because there's nobody coming to help you. You got to be that person who stands up and says the things that you believe and knows what you believe. It's not enough to have somebody else do it for you. I'm Steven Reichert. I'd love it if you subscribe to this channel. If you don't, that's fine. If you want to unsubscribe, that's okay too. I'm just telling it like I see it, and that's what I'm going to keep doing here. We're raising heritage hogs on pasture the old-fashioned way in western New Hampshire. That's what I'm up to. Hope to see you guys in the next video.